I wrote that down in my notebook, right next to the date, October 14th. It was a cold, clean fact, just like the ones I used to write on official reports. I used to be Dr. Aris Thorne, the best medical examiner in the city. I was the one who found the truth inside the bodies. Now I was just Aris, the woman who owned a very large, very cold, very quiet building on the edge of town. A place where the rules of science and justice were finally the same. The building was an old meat locker. It smelled like metal and ozone, a sharp, clean smell that cut through the memory of hospital disinfectant. I had spent 6 months cleaning it, reinforcing the walls and setting up my new lab. It wasn't fancy, but it was perfect. It had the space, the silence, and the cold. The cold was the most important part. It kept things from rotting. It kept the truth from disappearing. I walked over to the thick steel door of the main freezer. The air inside was a constant, steady 0 degrees Fahrenheit. I could hear the faint, ragged sound of a woman crying, a sound so weak it was almost a whisper. "Time's up, Nurse Reynolds," I said, my voice flat. I didn't need to shout. The silence of the building carried every sound. I pulled the heavy door open. A cloud of white mist rushed out, smelling of ice and fear. Inside, the room was huge. The walls were lined with steel hooks, but they were empty now. In the center, under a single, bright surgical lamp, was a table, and on that table was Nurse Reynolds. She was shivering so hard her whole body bounced. Her face was pale blue, and her lips were cracked. She was wearing a thin hospital gown, and her hands and feet were strapped down with thick leather cuffs. She looked like a broken doll. "Please, Dr. Thorne," she begged, her voice a thin, reedy sound. I didn't know, I just did what Dr. Thorne told me. I didn't answer, I just looked at her. Nurse Reynolds, she had been my ex-husband's favorite nurse. She was the one who had held the syringe steady. She was the one who had helped him fake the records. She was the one who had made sure my son, Leo, looked like just another kid who took too many pills. Leo, my brilliant, funny, kind Leo. He was only 17. He had a whole life waiting for him. He wanted to be an engineer. He wanted to build things that lasted. But they took it. They took it because I told the truth about the hospital's dirty secrets, the unnecessary surgeries, the fake billing, the money they stole. They took him to shut me up. The police said it was an overdose. They closed the case in 3 days. They didn't even look at the evidence I had. They just wrote it down and walked away. But I knew I was the medical examiner. I knew the difference between a real overdose and a forced one. I knew the tiny, perfect bruise on his arm where the needle went in. I knew the look in his eyes that wasn't peace, but terror. And now, I was the judge, the jury, and the medical examiner all in one. I picked up a small, silver tray from a nearby metal cart. On it were 3 things: a syringe, a small glass vial, and a very sharp scalpel. "You said you didn't know," I said, finally. I pulled up a stool and sat down next to the table, looking right into her eyes. "But you did. You knew that syringe was full of something that would stop a healthy boy's heart. You knew that boy was my son, and you did it anyway." Tears froze on her cheeks. "He said he would fire me. I have a family." "And I had a son," I said, my voice still quiet. "Now let's talk about guilt." I picked up the vial. It held a clear liquid. It wasn't poison. It was something much worse. It was a drug that didn't kill you, but made your body feel every single nerve ending at once. It was a drug I had read about in old, forgotten medical journals, a drug that made pain a physical, crushing thing. It was a drug that turned your own body into your worst enemy. "The official cause of death for my son was accidental overdose," I said, tapping the vial. "The official cause of your death will be guilt." I didn't wait for her to scream again. I found a vein in her arm, a nice, fat one, and pushed the needle in. I pushed the plunger down slowly, watching the clear liquid disappear into her body. It took about 30 seconds for the drug to hit. First, her eyes went wide. Then a gasp like a fish pulled out of water. Then the screaming started again. But this time it was different. It wasn't just fear. It was pure raw agony. It was the sound of a person whose body was telling them they were being burned alive, that their bones were breaking, that their skin was being peeled off all at the same time. But none of it was happening. It was just the drug, making her feel every bad thing she had ever done, every lie she had ever told, as a physical, burning pain. She thrashed against the straps, her muscles straining so hard I thought the leather would break. Her face twisted into a mask of pure horror. Blood vessels burst in her eyes. I watched her teeth grind down until I heard a sickening crack. I sat there and watched. I watched the clock. I watched her face. I watched until the screaming turned into a hoarse, broken sound, and then finally into silence. It took 3 days, 2 hours, and 47 minutes for her heart to finally give up. Not from the drug, but from the sheer, total exhaustion of feeling pain. Her body simply ran out of energy to keep living. The drug was a perfect, precise tool. It didn't kill, it just forced the body to destroy itself from the inside out, driven by the terror of its own nerves. When it was over, I unstrapped her. Her body was stiff and cold. I moved her to a different part of the freezer, a special section I had built. It was lined with stainless steel shelves, like a library for the dead. I worked for hours. I used my old skills, the ones I was the best at. I cleaned her body. I took pictures. I measured everything. I didn't cut her open, not yet. The final autopsy was the most important part. I found a small, white toe tag. I wrote on it with a black marker. Name, Susan Reynolds. Date of death, October 17th. Time, 5:17 a.m. Cause of death, guilt. Then I wrote a detailed report in my notebook, a report that would never be seen by a judge or a jury. It was for me. It was the truth. Observation. Subject showed signs of extreme, prolonged nervous system overload. Mechanism. Induced state of hyperalgesia, extreme pain sensitivity, leading to systemic nervous collapse. Conclusion. The subject's own guilt, amplified by chemical means, became a physical force that destroyed her body. I placed the tag on her toe. Then I wrapped her in a thick, clear plastic sheet, the kind they use for preserving things for a very long time. I placed her gently on the shelf. She was perfect, perfectly preserved, a monument to the truth. I looked at the shelf. It was empty except for Nurse Reynolds. I had 3 more names on my list, 3 more empty shelves to fill. I closed the door to the special section. The click of the latch was loud in the silence. I walked back to my lab bench. I washed my hands until they were raw, not because they were dirty, but because I needed the feeling of the cold water. I looked at the list of names. Next up, Detective Miller, the man who sold my son's life for a few $1,000s. I smiled, a cold, thin smile that didn't reach my eyes. Time to go shopping, I whispered to the empty room. I needed to find the perfect tool for a man who loved to lie. A man who needed to be forced to face the truth, even if it killed him. And it would. It absolutely would. The cold precision of my revenge was the only thing keeping me warm. It was the only justice left in the world, and I was just getting started. The first one was just a test. The next one would be a masterpiece of science, a masterpiece of guilt. The cold was good for thinking. It kept the edges sharp. After I put Nurse Reynolds on the shelf, I spent a whole day just cleaning. Not just the blood, there wasn't much of that, thanks to the drug, but the feeling. I had to make the room clean for the next one. Every tool went back in its place. Every drop of water was wiped up. I looked at my list. Detective Miller. He was a big, sloppy man who liked cheap whiskey and expensive secrets. He was the one who signed the paper that said my Leo died by accident. He took money to make the truth disappear. He sold my son's life for a few $1,000s. That kind of dirt doesn't wash off. I needed to catch him in a way that made sense to him. He didn't care about justice. He only cared about money. I went to my small office in the front of the meat locker. It looked like a normal, messy office, but the computer was special. It was a ghost. It could send messages that no one could trace back to me. I spent hours studying Miller. I knew his routine. He always went to a bar called the Rusty Nail on Thursday nights. It was a dark place where he met people who wanted to buy his silence. I typed a short message. I used a special code that only a dirty cop would understand. It was about a new shipment and a big score. The message went to a burner phone I knew he used. Rusty Nail, midnight, Thursday, big score, bring a bag, don't tell anyone. It was simple, it was greedy, it was perfect for Miller. I knew the police would be looking for Nurse Reynolds. They had to. Even a bad police force has to pretend to look. But I also knew they wouldn't look hard. Miller and the others would make sure of that. They would say she ran away. They would say she was a bad person. But there was one thing I didn't plan for. A small, sharp piece of grit in the machine. Meanwhile, across town, a woman named Detective Isabella Rossi was sitting at her desk. She was new, and she was tired of the old, lazy ways of the police station. She had the file for Susan Reynolds, the missing nurse. Her boss, a man who smelled like old coffee, told her to close the case. She probably just ran off with a boyfriend, Rossi. Happens all the time. But Rossi didn't like probably. She liked facts. She looked at the file. The nurse was a quiet woman. She had a good job. She had a cat. People who run away don't usually leave their cat food bowl full. Rossi went to the nurse's apartment. The place was clean. Too clean. The police had already been there, but they were sloppy. Rossi got down on her hands and knees. She used a special light. She looked at the floor where the police said there was nothing. And then she saw it. It was tiny. It was a single strand of hair stuck in the carpet fibers. But it wasn't just a hair. It was frozen. It was brittle like a tiny piece of glass. It had been exposed to extreme cold. Rossi put the hair in a small plastic bag. She didn't tell her boss. She knew he would just laugh. She went back to her desk and started looking at the nurse's life. She saw the name of the hospital. She saw the name of the doctor the nurse worked for, Dr. Aris Thorne. Then she found an old newspaper article. It was about a scandal at the hospital. A doctor had blown the whistle on fake surgeries. The doctor's name was Dr. Aris Thorne, and the article mentioned her son, Leo, who had died of a supposed overdose right after the scandal broke. Rossi looked at the frozen hair. She looked at the names, Reynolds, Thorne, Thorne, Leo. She felt a cold feeling, but it wasn't from the hair. It was the feeling of a big, dark secret. The feeling that the missing nurse was not just a runaway. She was a piece of a much bigger, much colder puzzle. I was ready, Thursday night. I drove my old, beat-up truck to the warehouse district. The meat locker was dark and quiet. I had everything set up for Miller. I had bought a special kind of chair. It was metal, and it had straps. I had also bought a lot of wires and a small machine that made electricity. It looked like something from an old movie, but it was real. I also had my special chemical cocktail. It wasn't the pain drug. This one was a mix of things that made a person talk and talk and talk. It made them feel like they couldn't stop telling the truth. I waited. I didn't feel nervous. I felt calm. This was science. This was an experiment. At 11:58 p.m., a dark, unmarked car pulled up to the back of the meat locker. Detective Miller got out. He was alone. He was holding a small, empty duffel bag. He was ready for his big score. He looked around, his eyes narrow and greedy. He saw the back door of the meat locker, which I had left slightly open. A single dim light was on inside. He walked right into the trap. I was waiting for him. I didn't use a gun. I used a needle. A very small, very fast needle. He didn't even see me. He just felt a sharp sting in his neck, and then the world went soft and dark. I caught him before he hit the floor. He was heavy, like a sack of rocks. "Welcome, Detective Miller," I whispered. "It's time for your autopsy." I dragged him into the main freezer. The cold air hit his face. He wouldn't be feeling the cold for long. He was about to feel something much, much worse. He was about to feel the truth. When Detective Miller woke up, he was strapped into the metal chair. His head was heavy and his mouth was dry. He tried to move, but the leather cuffs held him tight. "What the?" he started, his voice thick. "Welcome back, Detective," I said. I was standing in front of him, wearing a clean white lab coat. I looked like a doctor, which I was. A very specific kind of doctor. He looked around the cold, dark room. He saw the empty steel hooks. He saw the single, bright light above his head. "Where am I? Who are you? I'll have your badge for this," he yelled. He was trying to sound tough, but his eyes were wide with fear. "You're in my lab," I said calmly. "And I'm Dr. Thorne, the one you helped silence." His face went pale. He remembered the name. He remembered the money. "Look, Dr. Thorne. I don't know what you think you're doing, but you need to let me go. I'm a police officer. You're making a big mistake." "Mistake?" I smiled. It was a cold, professional smile. "The mistake was yours, Detective. You took a bribe to cover up the murder of my son, Leo. You signed the paper that said it was an accident. You sold the truth." I walked over to the metal cart. This time, it held a small machine with wires and dials. It was my truth machine. "You love to lie, Detective," I said. "It's how you make your living. But here, in my lab, we only deal in facts. And I'm going to make sure you tell me every single one." I took 2 small metal pads and stuck them to his hands. They were cold. The wires ran from the pads to the machine. "This machine is simple," I explained, like a teacher to a slow student. "It measures the tiny changes in your skin when you lie. When you try to hide the truth, your body gives it away. And when you lie, the machine gives you a little reminder." I turned a dial. A low hum filled the room. "What kind of reminder?" Miller asked, his voice shaking. "A small, controlled electric shock," I said. "Not enough to hurt you badly. Just enough to make you very, very uncomfortable. Enough to make you want to tell the truth." I started with a simple question. "What is your name?" "Detective Frank Miller," he answered. The machine stayed quiet. "Did you take a bribe to close the case on Leo Thorne?" Miller hesitated. His eyes darted away. "No, I followed procedure. It was an open and shut case." "BZZZT." A sharp jolt of electricity hit his hands. He screamed, a short, sharp sound. "Stop it, that hurts." "The truth doesn't hurt, Detective," I said. "Lies do. Let's try again. Did you take a bribe?" He was sweating now, even in the cold. Yes, I took the money. Thompson gave it to me." The machine stayed quiet. The truth was clean. I spent the next 3 hours with him. I gave him a small dose of the truth serum, a chemical that made it hard to keep secrets. The drug and the machine worked together. Every time he tried to twist the story, every time he tried to protect himself, the machine would sing its angry song. He confessed everything. He told me about the meeting with Administrator Thompson. He told me how he laughed when he signed the paper. He even told me about the other bribes he had taken over the years. The lies poured out of him like dirty water. He was crying, begging me to stop. I'm sorry about your boy. I'll give the money back, just let me go. Sorry is not a fact, detective, I said. It's just a word. I looked at the machine. The wires were still attached. I turned the dial not to the small reminder setting, but to the highest one. You see, detective, I said, leaning close. Your heart is weak. All those years of cheap whiskey and bad food, and now all this stress, all this guilt. I looked at the machine. I'm going to ask you one last question, and this time the answer doesn't matter, only the feeling. I pressed the button. A huge surge of electricity hit him. It wasn't just his hands this time. It went through his whole body. His back arched against the straps. His eyes rolled back. The shock was not the killer. The shock was the trigger. His heart, already weak from the stress of facing his own terrible truth, couldn't take the sudden, massive jolt. It fluttered, then stopped. I watched the monitor I had attached to his chest, a flat line. I waited 5 minutes, just to be sure. Then I unstrapped him. He was still warm, but he was gone. I took him to the preservation shelf. I worked with the same cold precision. I cleaned him. I measured him. I took the pictures. I wrote on the white toe tag. Name, Frank Miller, date of death. October 21st, time, 3:45 a.m. Cause of death, guilt. In my notebook, I wrote the final report. Observation. Subject suffered a massive myocardial infarction, heart attack. Mechanism. Extreme psychological stress induced by forced confession, combined with chemical and electrical stimuli, led to a fatal cardiac event. Conclusion. The subject's own guilt, amplified by scientific means, caused his heart to fail. I wrapped him in the clear plastic and placed him on the shelf next to Nurse Reynolds. They looked like two frozen statues, waiting for the world to find them. 2 down, 2 to go. I looked at the list. Next, Administrator Thompson, the man who loved money more than human life. I smiled again. Time to find something gold, I whispered. His death would be a masterpiece of avarice, a golden tomb for a greedy man. The cold was perfect. It kept the truth fresh, and I was ready for the next step in my experiment, the next step in my justice. 2 shelves were full, 2 more to go. I looked at the name, Administrator Thompson. This man was the root of the rot. He didn't kill Leo for hate or fear. He killed him for money. He was the one who gave the orders. He was the one who paid the bribes. His guilt was the color of gold. I needed to find a way to make his death match his life. He loved money so much, he would die for it. I spent a week building the trap. It wasn't a chair or a table. It was a small, strong room I built inside the main freezer. It was just big enough for one person to stand in. The walls were thick steel. I also bought the gold. Not real gold, of course, but a special kind of industrial resin. It was a liquid that looked like thick, molten gold when it was mixed, and when it dried, it became hard as rock. It would preserve him perfectly. A golden tomb. I used my ghost computer again. I sent Thompson an email from a fake bank account. The subject line was simple. Hospital's secret vault, your share. The email said that the hospital had a secret fund, a huge amount of money from all the fake surgeries. It said that the fund was about to be found by the government, but there was a way to move it. It said the money was hidden in a secure, private vault on the edge of town. Thompson was a smart man, but his greed was bigger than his brain. He had to see the money. He had to have it. I told him to come alone, late at night, and to bring a special code word. He replied in less than an hour. He was hooked. While I was preparing my golden tomb, Detective Rossi was getting closer. I knew she was. I could feel the heat of her investigation, even out here in the cold. She had found the frozen hair. That was a good piece of police work, better than Miller ever did. Rossi went to the hospital. She asked questions about Nurse Reynolds. She asked about Detective Miller. The people she talked to were nervous. They didn't want to talk about the past. Then she found the old files, the ones about the malpractice suit, the ones about Dr. Aris Thorne and her son, Leo. Rossi sat in her car reading the files. She saw the dates, the whistleblowing, the cover-up, Leo's death, then the disappearances of Reynolds and Miller. She looked at the names, Reynolds, Miller, Thompson, Thorne. They were all connected to the same dark secret. She looked at the picture of Dr. Aris Thorne, a beautiful woman with cold, smart eyes, a woman who had lost everything. Rossi knew the police chief wanted her to stop. He told her to focus on real crimes. But she couldn't. She knew she was looking at a kind of justice that the law had failed to deliver. She just didn't know how extreme it was. She looked at the address of the old meat locker. It was listed as Aris Thorne's property. Rossi knew she had to go there, but she wouldn't tell her boss. Not yet. She wanted to see the truth for herself. Thompson arrived at 2:00 a.m. He was wearing a fancy suit, even though he was coming to a meat locker. He looked nervous, but his eyes were shining with greed. He carried a small briefcase, ready to fill it with cash. I was waiting for him in the main room. I was wearing my lab coat. "Dr. Thorne," he asked, looking around the cold, empty space. "What is this? Where is the vault?" "The vault is right here, Mr. Thompson," I said, pointing to the small steel room. "But it's not full of money, it's full of truth." He didn't understand. He just saw the steel door. "The code word is profit. Now open it. I don't have all night." "The code word is guilt, Mr. Thompson," I said. He turned to run, but I was faster. I used a small, powerful gas that made him dizzy and weak. It wasn't a sleep gas. It was a gas that made his muscles heavy and slow. I dragged him into the small steel room. I strapped his hands to the wall so he had to stand up straight. He was trapped. "What are you doing?" he gasped, struggling against the straps. "I'm giving you what you love," I said. "I'm giving you gold." I had a large hose running into the room. It was connected to a huge mixing tank. I had already mixed the resin. It was thick and shining, the color of a new gold coin. I turned the valve. The golden liquid began to pour into the room. It was cold and thick. It started to rise around his ankles. "It's cold," he screamed. "What is this? Get me out." "It's the price of your greed, Mr. Thompson," I said, watching through a small, thick window. "It's the gold you stole from the hospital. It's the gold you used to buy my son's life." The resin was rising quickly. It reached his knees. He was struggling, pulling at the straps, but they were too strong. "I'll give you everything. My bank accounts, my house, just stop this," he begged. "I don't want your money, Mr. Thompson," I said. "I want the truth." I held up a small recorder. "Tell me why you ordered Leo Thorne's death. Tell me why you covered it up. Tell me the truth, and I will stop the flow." The resin was up to his waist. He was crying, screaming. He knew I wouldn't stop. "It was the money," he shrieked. "The lawsuit would have ruined us. I had to protect the hospital's reputation. I had to protect the money." He confessed everything. The words were choked and wet, but they were clear on the recording. I didn't stop the flow. I let him finish his confession. The golden liquid reached his chest. He couldn't move his arms anymore. He could only move his head. "Please, I can't breathe." "You couldn't breathe the truth, Mr. Thompson," I said. "Now you will be preserved in your own avarice." The resin covered his mouth, then his nose, then his eyes. The last thing I saw was the terror in his eyes, staring out from the thick, golden liquid. When the room was full, I turned off the valve. I waited an hour for the resin to set. It was hard and cold. I opened the door to the small room. Thompson was gone. In his place was a perfect, man-shaped statue of shining gold, a monument to his greed. I worked for hours, cleaning the statue, making it perfect. I didn't need to tag his toe. The statue itself was the tag. I wrote the final report in my notebook. Observation. Subject was encased in a fast-setting industrial resin. Mechanism. Asphyxiation due to physical restriction of the chest and lungs. Conclusion. The subject's own avarice, which led him to the trap, became the physical mechanism of his death. I wrote the final tag on a small plaque and placed it at the base of the statue. Name, Administrator Thompson. Date of death, October 28th. Time, 4:12 a.m. Cause of death, guilt manifested as asphyxiation by avarice. 3 down, 1 to go. I looked at the list. Dr. Aris Thorne, my ex-husband, the one who should have protected Leo, the one who was the most guilty of all. I knew the police were close. I knew Rossi was smart, but I had to finish the experiment. I had to complete the set. I looked at the golden statue. It was beautiful. It was cold. It was perfect. I was ready for the final act, the most personal one, the one that would hurt the most for both of us. 3 shelves were full. The golden statue of Thompson stood next to the frozen detective and the screaming nurse. They were perfect. They were the truth. Now for the last one. Dr. Aris Thorne, my ex-husband, the man who had once promised to love me forever, the man who had killed my son. I didn't need a fancy trap for Marcus. I knew his weakness was his ego. He thought he was the smartest man in the room. He thought he could fix anything. I sent him a message, not from a ghost computer, but from my old personal email. It was simple. Marcus, I have the final piece of evidence, the one that proves you were right all along. Meet me at the old meat locker. Come alone. It's time to talk about Leo. He came. Of course he came. He thought he could talk his way out of it. He thought he could charm me or maybe even overpower me. He thought he was still in control. He walked into the main freezer. He saw the 3 statues. His face went white. He didn't scream. He just whispered, "Aris, what have you done?" "I've done an autopsy, Marcus," I said, standing by the operating table. "A very long, very detailed autopsy on the death of justice, and you are the final specimen." He tried to run, but I was ready. I used a nerve agent, a small puff of gas that didn't make him sleep, but made his legs useless. He collapsed onto the cold floor. I dragged him onto the table. I strapped him down. This time I didn't use a drug to make him feel pain. I used my hands. I used my knowledge. "You were a surgeon, Marcus," I said, picking up a scalpel. "You loved precision. You loved cutting into people and putting them back together. You thought you were a god." I didn't use general anesthesia. I used a local block, just enough to keep him from moving, but not enough to stop him from feeling. He was fully awake. "I'm going to perform a surgery, Marcus," I said. "A surgery on your soul." I made a small, clean cut on his arm, right where the nerves were close to the surface. He gasped. "This is the radial nerve," I explained, my voice calm and professional. "It controls the feeling in your hand. You used your hands to sign the papers that covered up the truth. You used your hands to shake Thompson's hand. You used your hands to betray me." I didn't cut the nerve, I just exposed it. Then I picked up a tiny silver microelectrode. It was the size of a needle. "This is a stimulator," I said. "Every time I touch this nerve, you will feel a memory, a very strong, very real memory." I touched the nerve. Marcus screamed. It was a deep, guttural sound, not of pain, but of pure, mental agony. "Leo," he shrieked. "Leo, stop, don't look at me." I pulled the electrode away. "What did you see, Marcus?" He was panting, tears streaming down his face. "I saw Leo. I saw him in the hospital bed. He was looking at me. He knew." I touched the nerve again. This time he thrashed against the straps. The money, the hospital, I had to protect the funding, I had to be the best. I touched it a third time. This was the one I was waiting for. He went silent. His eyes were wide, staring at the ceiling. A single tear rolled down his cheek. "Tell me, Marcus," I whispered. "Why did you let them kill Leo? Was it just the money?" He shook his head slowly. No, Aris, it wasn't just the money." He looked right into my eyes. This was the twist, the final, terrible truth. "I hated you," he choked out. "I hated that you were better than me. You were the better surgeon. You were the better examiner. You were the one who found the truth. I was always second best." His voice was a ragged whisper. "When Thompson said he could silence you through Leo, I told him how. I told him the perfect drug. I told him how to make it look like an accident. I didn't just let it happen, Aris. I planned it. I wanted to destroy the one thing you loved more than your work. I wanted to see you break." The air in the freezer went colder. My heart, which I thought was frozen solid, cracked. It wasn't just corruption. It was pure, personal hatred. I looked at the scalpel in my hand. I could end him now. It would be quick. It would be merciful. But I couldn't. Not yet. The final truth had to be preserved. Just as I raised the scalpel for the final, fatal cut, I heard a sound. A car door slamming outside. I looked at the clock. It was too early for the police. The heavy door to the main freezer burst open. A woman stood there, her gun drawn, her face pale in the cold light. Detective Isabella Rossi. "Dr. Thorne, drop the weapon, put your hands up," she yelled. Her voice echoed in the huge room. I looked at her. She was young, she was clean, she was the law. I looked at Marcus, strapped to the table, his eyes full of a guilt that was finally real. I looked at the 3 preserved bodies on the shelves. The truth, waiting to be found. "You're too late, detective," I said, slowly lowering the scalpel to the metal tray. Rossi took a step closer. She saw the golden statue. She saw the frozen man and the frozen woman. She saw the toe tags. She saw the name on the table, Dr. Marcus Thorne. She lowered her gun slightly. Her eyes were wide with horror and understanding. "The bodies, the tags, guilt," she whispered. "It's the only honest cause of death, detective," I said. "The law couldn't find it, so I had to use science." I reached into my lab coat pocket and pulled out the small recorder. I tossed it to her. It clattered on the cold floor. "That is the confession of the man on the table," I said, "and the confessions of the 3 on the shelf. Listen to it. Then you can arrest me." Rossi didn't move. She looked at the recorder. She looked at Marcus, who was silently begging her with his eyes. She looked at me. She was standing at the edge of a moral cliff. She was the law, but she knew the law had failed. She knew the truth was on that recorder. I gave her the choice, the final, terrible choice. "Justice, detective," I said, "or the law." I picked up the scalpel again. I didn't look at her. I looked at Marcus. I knew what I had to do. I had to finish the experiment. I had to complete the set. The truth had to be preserved. Detective Rossi looked at the recorder on the floor. She looked at the scalpel in my hand. She looked at the 4 statues of frozen, guilty people. She knew what she had to do. The law was a slow, blind machine. Justice, sometimes, needed a sharp, cold edge. She took a deep breath. She didn't raise her gun. She didn't move to arrest me. Instead, she did the one thing I didn't expect. She turned her back on me. She walked over to the door and pulled it shut, leaving us alone in the cold. The heavy steel door clicked, sealing us in. "You have 5 minutes, Dr. Thorne," she said, her voice muffled through the thick door. "I'm going to listen to the tape, and then I'm going to call it in." She chose justice. She chose the truth. I looked at Marcus. His eyes were wide with terror. He knew what that meant. He knew the law wouldn't save him. "No, Aris, please, I'll tell them everything, I'll confess," he screamed. "You already did, Marcus," I said, "and it wasn't enough. Your confession was about your hatred for me, not your guilt over Leo." I raised the scalpel. It was a beautiful, sharp piece of steel. It was the tool of his trade. "You loved precision," I whispered, "so let's be precise." I didn't cut him. I didn't stab him. I found the one spot on his chest that he, as a surgeon, knew best. The spot where the heart was most vulnerable. I made a single, clean, deep incision. It was a cut that went straight to the heart, stopping it instantly. It was a death that was quick, silent, and final. A surgeon's death. He didn't even have time to scream. His eyes just went dull, the terror replaced by a sudden, empty peace. I lowered the scalpel. I was shaking, but not from the cold. It was done. The last piece of the experiment was complete. I worked quickly. I cleaned him. I measured him. I preserved him. He was the most important piece. He had to be perfect. I found the last toe tag. I wrote on it with a steady hand. Name, Dr. Marcus Thorne. Date of death, November 4th. Time, 1:58 a.m. Cause of death, guilt. I placed him on the last empty shelf. 4 perfect statues, 4 monuments to the truth. I walked back to the door. I pulled it open. Rossi was standing there, the recorder in her hand. Her face was pale, but her eyes were hard. She had heard everything. "It's done," I said. "I know," she replied. She looked at the 4 bodies. "You set a timer, didn't you? You wanted them to find this." "The truth must be preserved, detective," I said. "The law failed Leo, but science will not fail the truth." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small remote control. I pressed a button. A loud, clear voice echoed through the meat locker. It was my voice. "This is Dr. Aris Thorne. I have completed my investigation into the murder of my son, Leo Thorne. The evidence, including the bodies and the full confessions of the guilty parties, is preserved at this location. I am now ready to be taken into custody." Rossi looked at me, shocked. "You called them?" "I called them an hour ago," I said. "I just wanted to make sure I had time to finish the autopsy." The police raid was chaos. Sirens screamed. Lights flashed. The cold, quiet meat locker was suddenly full of shouting men in uniform. They found the 4 bodies. They found the golden statue. They found the confessions. They found my notebooks, filled with the precise, scientific details of each death. The police chief, the man who smelled like old coffee, was furious. He wanted to hide it all, but Rossi was there. She had the recorder, she had the truth. The story exploded. The 4 bodies, each labeled guilt, were on every news channel. The hospital scandal, the cover-up, the murder of Leo Thorne, it all came out. I was arrested. I was put on trial. The prosecution called me a monster. They showed pictures of the golden statue. They read the gruesome details of Nurse Reynolds' death. But the defense had the confessions. They had the evidence of the hospital's corruption. They had the story of a mother who lost everything to a system that failed her. The public was divided. Was I a killer or a hero? I took the stand. I looked at the jury. I looked at the judge. I looked at Detective Rossi sitting in the back row. "I didn't kill them," I said, my voice clear and steady. "Their guilt did. I just provided the environment for the truth to manifest. I was a medical examiner. My job was to find the cause of death, and in every case the cause was the same. It was guilt. The jury was out for 3 days, the same amount of time Nurse Reynolds screamed. The verdict came back, guilty of murder. But the moment the verdict was read, the real justice began. The hospital was shut down. The police chief was arrested. The truth about Leo's murder was finally, officially, on the record. I was taken away, but I was not broken. My final thought was of Leo. His name was cleared. His death was avenged. The truth was preserved. The cold precision of my revenge had worked. I had lost my freedom, but I had won the only thing that mattered: justice through science.